Welcome to the Coast to Coast podcast, brought to you by Play Picks and the Lines. Coming to you from the West Coast, Josh Lander, joined by my guy Nate Weitzer on the East Coast. And we're kicking off this week with a little Monday night slate here, about 5 games. In this one, taking a look at the Charlotte Hornets hosting those Toronto Raptors. 2 teams kind of moving in the opposite direction right now. We'll take a look at some of those best bets and some player props, which Nate also has on his great article up on playpicks.com as well, with those best bets and player props as well in there. And make sure you do like and subscribe to the page. Got a couple other videos up for you today, including that player props video we'll look to stay hot on with you guys tonight. And as always, if you do still need a FanDuel or DraftKings account, head to fdpicks.com or dkpicks.com and find those listings in your area, such as what we've got for tonight. Nate, let's get into it.
Yeah, we got Raptors -2 at Charlotte right now. It's only fluctuated a little bit, but the total has moved a lot. It opened at 225, went up to 227, and is now down to 224. So interesting where you want to bet that, when you can get it. The other 4 games tonight, we got Miami -6.5 now at Washington. That opened at about 4-point spread. That total is dropping to 207. The Warriors are -12.5 at OKC with a 211 total. Suns -8 at the Bulls. We'll have to see if Zach LaVine's going to be able to go on a back-to-back for Chicago. That'll change everything. And then the Knicks +7 now at Utah. We will break that game down in a separate episode for you today. Toronto, I mean, you can't look at the entire season in terms of how they're going to perform. And Charlotte, Toronto has been undulating more than Charlotte, quicker, I would say, into the 7-game samples where they lost 5 of their previous 7, and they were 28th in offensive rating, just playing really bad. And then they go into Charlotte and all of a sudden catch fire, go 47%, hit 16 threes to score 125 points. Since then, they've been rolling, won 6 of 7 and 5 straight, scoring 117.5. The best 3-point percentage in the league by a mile. Not 8th in both offensive and defensive rating, but interestingly, still 25th in pace. And it's interesting, Charlotte's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, where they had been rolling, and then all of a sudden they lose that game. They've lost 6 of 8 now. They're averaging just 108 points per game, despite dropping 158 on Indiana. So that tells you where their offense is at. They're 29th in 3-point shooting. They're 26th in regular field goal shooting, 24th in offensive rating, and they've been going under in 4 straight. And then it's all despite playing at the 4th fastest pace in the league. So it's a really strange case study here in terms of how you can play fast and go under and then play slow. And the Raptors are going over because they've just been much more efficient. So I said that I want to take the under here. I mean, it's still a situation where you're getting value on Charlotte unders. They've gone under in 16 of their last 22. They've gone under 5 straight when they've been the favorite. I know they're +2 tonight here. But their last 4 games have averaged just 204. Their last 5 meetings before this anomaly, I would say, where the Raptors just shot so well without Fred VanVleet, mind you. He sat out that game. And then their previous 5 with Toronto, they only averaged 216.5. If it's bet up at all, that's what I'm saying, 226 or 7, I would definitely take the under still. Because not only would you get a win, you'd feel really smug about zigging when the odds makers zag. But I think the starting point is to just take Toronto, which is playing much better ball at this point. They have a slight rest advantage here, been off since Friday after that murderous schedule we talked about where they still kept winning. Triple overtime with Miami, 5 games in 7 nights, and they just kept it rolling. And Charlotte happens to be 3-11 straight up with a rest disadvantage here. At home, they're 1-6 in their last 7 at home against the spread, 2-5 straight up. Again, playing at the 4th fastest pace, but with the worst offensive rating in basketball. I don't know what's going on in terms of LaMelo Ball and company, but they have not found much rhythm. And the Raptors are a well-coached team, pretty good defensively, as I mentioned, 8th in defensive rating over this last hot stretch here. So I think they can limit Charlotte to pull out the win here. It's a question of whether their offense is going to be limited on the other end, which would keep us under. certainly if Toronto doesn't have one of those big-time offensive performances that we saw last time.
Yeah, and I mean, there's one guy I'm kind of looking at on Charlotte as one of the main culprits, and he's amongst a couple of guys on Charlotte right now who are playing really, really poorly. You know, you look at their last four. You mentioned all four of those going under. Dead last in offensive rating, sixth in defensive rating in that time as well. And the pace stays high, but their offense is that's the worst in the league as of right now. Drilling down into why, you know, at the very least, you can start with Miles Bridges as a huge reason for why. I mean, just in his last four, he's down to less than 13 points a game, 6 boards, about 3.5 assists, and those assists were up to about 6 on the season. Huge reasons for why they were so good, aside from guys like LaMelo and then even, Gordon Hayward being able to set up other guys. They also had Miles Bridges, who apparently was a playmaker this year, and that's come down a lot. You know, him and LaMelo Ball were playing really well together. There was a really interesting stat where they had the most assists to each other of any two players in the league, both ways, right, in terms of passing to each other. And it just hasn't been the case, especially when you see Miles's, assists going down so far. And those points, that's really, when you've got 2 guys, 3 guys scoring around 20 points a game in LaMelo, Gordon, and Miles, you've got the most potent offense in the league as they were earlier. Once one of those guys, especially Miles, goes down to the way he has, and then, you look at Gordon has only played in 2 of their last 4. He hasn't been impacting them at all, averaging less than 4 points a game in that time, as he's still really struggling to come back from injury. So there's a lot of, it's the players on this team who have obviously dropped their sort of the level of play that they had earlier in the season when it didn't really matter that their defensive rating was so bad. And at this point, being 6th in defensive rating is great. They turned around, the worst defensive team in the league for parts of the season, but it's come at the expense of their offense entirely. To your point, when you go that far down in your offensive rating from number 1 for a long time all the way down to where they're at now with those guys playing the way they are, I don't like it. I like Toronto, to be honest, a little bit more than I do like taking anything around this total. Like you were saying, Charlotte, especially the way they've been playing, that seems to be why you would feel good about the under. Obviously, Toronto playing at such a great pace on offense in terms of their last 4. So 6th best offensive rating, right? They're still in the top 5, at least in their last about 5-ish games. It's just a big turnaround for Toronto in a way that I feel much better about the way that they're playing and competing with the top teams in the East right now, especially, against the Eastern Conference in general. They've won 7 of their last 8 in that time frame with a margin of victory still about 4 points, which is really good when you look at some of the teams that they played in the Eastern Conference as of late and beat. We're talking about the top 2 seeds in the Heat and the Bulls. Another win. They've won 2 in a row against the Bulls. And then we mentioned that last win against the Hornets that really turned around the way that they were playing a bit as well in terms of playing a lot slower earlier. And then they come against the Hornets and things go up a little bit. So their trend is everybody except for the Hornets. It seems to be a team that they're, playing a little bit more choppily against. And in this one, I'm only afraid of that over because of the fact that it does seem like the zig. And if we want to try to zag, I would still not be quite as nervous as I would about taking the over, but I feel way better about Toronto just being a much better team at this point in time. And until I see Miles Bridges come back to the Miles Bridges that was potentially an all-star at one point in the season, I don't really feel good about picking Charlotte against pretty much anybody right now.
Yeah, so I mean, if you are afraid of the total because Toronto's been so hot, the Hornets team total at 112.5 could go under there. They averaged 109.5 their last 6 versus Toronto. You mentioned Miles Bridges' struggle. This is not the time to get hot against the team that has OG Anunoby on the wing. LaMelo Ball has not been very efficient with the basketball against this team. He has scored, but high turnovers. Both teams actually have a pretty bad assist-to-turnover ratio during their last 7 here. I just stick with the fact that I think that it's a bit of an anomaly to shoot that well and to get 125 points in that Charlotte game. Again, Charlotte's only gone over 4 times in their last 22 games, and the recent ones were just an eruption against the Pacers. They played the Lakers. And this Toronto game we're talking about, and that's why I think you can kind of zig the other way. Another thing with Toronto, while Charlotte struggled at home, Toronto in their last 7 road games is 22nd in offensive rating and 5th in defensive rating. They're scoring just 106. So, that 125 explosion, keep in mind, Toronto is playing in front of no fans. So it's a completely different situation when you have a home game and you're just in an empty gym and maybe you start shooting the lights out versus like doing that in a loud arena in Charlotte, I don't think that's another reason not to expect this type of repeat performance. Toronto's 29th in pace in those road games, 93 possessions per 100. They're 3-0 to the under this season when they are road favorites. There are a lot of numbers to indicate the over as well, don't get me wrong, including the fact that Toronto's gone over in 5 of their last 6. But prior to that, they went under in 7 of 8. They averaged about 100 points per game. And we talked last time before he sat out how Fred VanVleet has not erupted at all. In fact, he has some of his worst splits against Charlotte, averaging 10.5 points per game in his career. So if he's out there and he's shooting and missing, then that's certainly not going to lead to an explosion here. But really, it's about Toronto turning around, like you mentioned, beating really good teams and beating them out of the division. And we talked about how they were below the spread against non-division of foes prior to that, but since then they've covered in 5 straight outside of the division, including Atlanta twice, Miami, very good teams, and just something seems to be wrong here in Charlotte. You mentioned James Bouknight got into a bit of a tussle with the coach, and it's a young team without much veteran leadership to count on to right the ship here. Whereas Toronto, this core has been there. They're integrating the young guys well, but they have experience and they seem to be on the same page right now, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. And, the other thing about Toronto to that point, what they're doing, you mentioned the guys that are not stepping up, for Charlotte right now and who have just receded all the way back down to well below what they're, what we really expect the floor even from guys like Miles Bridges and Gordon Hayward right now. But, on the other side of the ball too, that's been the complete opposite where you've seen Gary Trent just go completely ballistic in his last 8 or so. Actually all the way back to the last 10 games, the guy's shooting nearly 50% from 3, shooting 5, shooting the ball from 3, 10.5 times a game, making it 5 times a game, 26 points per game in that time frame. Pascal's come back up with his consistency. He's at about 41 minutes a game. So all these starters getting a ton of minutes for Toronto, where Nick Nurse is really just going, well, I've had one of the worst benches in the league for most of the season. So let's just go ahead and keep these guys in the game. And it's really worked as of late. Obviously it might, lead to a bit of them getting a little bit more tired. And once again, Gary Trent's is a big reason I would consider, or I'd be a little bit scared of that over or under rather, because you're right. Fred VanVleet, even in his last 2 seasons playing against the Hornets, below his points averages for sure, averaging about 16 points a game, 9 assists, but those 16 points a game when they need him really to be a big scorer, if they're going to be that fast-paced go and score a team, especially when he's hitting those deep threes in transition. That's been down a little bit from him, where he was averaging about 32, 33 points a game for a while over a really large stretch. He's come back down to earth, but as he's done so, guys like Gary Trent and Pascal have raised their game significantly in a way that I just feel like Toronto is, a competitive team in the East at this point, a top 5, definitely top 6 seed. And Charlotte is really falling back to a little bit more what they are, which is if Miles Bridges isn't going to be a top 25 player in the league, Gordon Hayward certainly has not played like that in a long time this season as well, then you're looking at a Charlotte team that's really just going to fall back into a playing game and not be anywhere near as solid as Toronto, which is why, once again, best bet for me is just a really tiny spread for the Raptors, who are a much better team right now. So at any rate, that is all the time we have for you in this one. Make sure you are liked and subscribed to that page. Check out those other couple videos we have for you tonight on this Monday night slate. And until we see you next, happy betting.